You're not welcome here. Leave now before you ruin everything." Those words, spoken by my only son at his rehearsal dinner, cut deeper than any knife ever could. But I smiled, nodded graciously, and walked out with my head held high. What Thomas didn't know, what his precious fiancée certainly didn't know, was that I'd already seen the security footage from her business trip to Miami, and I was about to teach them both a lesson they'd never forget. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It warms this old heart to know where my words travel. My name is Margaret Hensley, and at 74 years old, I've learned that the sweetest revenge is served with a smile and impeccable timing. Let me take you back 6 months, to when this nightmare began. The restaurant was one of those trendy places with exposed brick and mismatched vintage furniture. Thomas had chosen it specifically because he knew I preferred quieter establishments. That should have been my first warning sign that something was wrong. "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet," Thomas said, his hand resting proprietarily on the slim shoulder of a woman who couldn't have been older than 32. "My son was 41. This is Natasha Reynolds. We're getting married in 6 months." The world tilted slightly. Thomas had mentioned dating someone, but married. In 6 months? We'd barely had time to process his divorce from Amy, which had been finalized just 8 months prior. "It's such an honor to meet you. Mrs. Hensley," Natasha purred, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her grip was firm, practiced. "Thomas has told me so much about you." I studied her as we sat down. Blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, designer clothes that whispered money rather than shouted it, a smile that never quite reached her ice-blue eyes, and jewelry, expensive jewelry, that I recognized from the collection my late husband had left to Thomas. "How did you two meet?" I asked, keeping my voice pleasant. "At a charity gala for the Children's Hospital," Natasha said, her hand finding Thomas's across the table. "I'm on the board of directors. Thomas was there representing his firm, and we just connected." My son beamed at her like she'd hung the moon. The dinner progressed with Natasha dominating the conversation, dropping names of important people she knew, mentioning properties she was considering for their future home. Always our future home, never letting Thomas contribute much to the planning. "We're thinking of a destination wedding," Thomas said excitedly. "Maybe Tuscany. Natasha has connections there." "Of course she does," I murmured. Natasha's eyes sharpened. "I'm sorry, did you say something, Margaret?" "May I call you Margaret?" "How long have you been on the Children's Hospital Board?" I asked instead of answering. 3 years. "I'm very passionate about philanthropy." "That's wonderful. And what did you do before that?" Something flickered across her face. "I worked in real estate. Commercial properties mainly. In Boston? I've lived in several cities. Boston, Chicago, San Francisco. I like to experience different places," I nodded, filing away the information. Thomas was too smitten to notice the vagueness of her answers, but I'd spent 50 years married to a prosecutor. I knew evasion when I heard it. After dinner, as we stood outside waiting for the valet, Natasha excused herself to take a phone call. The moment she was out of earshot, Thomas turned to me with that hopeful expression that had always been my weakness. "So, what do you think?" "I think you should slow down," I said carefully. 6 months isn't very long to plan a wedding, and you barely know her." His face clouded over. "I knew you'd react like this." "Like what?" "Like you can't stand to see me happy. Like you're jealous that I've found someone after Amy." "Thomas, that's not fair, isn't it? You never liked Amy either. You always found something wrong with everyone I dated." That stung because it wasn't true. I'd adored Amy. I'd cried when she left him, though I understood why she had. Thomas's workaholic tendencies had destroyed that marriage, not me. "I just think you should take your time," I said quietly. "Make sure you really know her before you make this kind of commitment. I know everything I need to know. She's brilliant, successful, and she loves me. Why can't you just be happy for me?" Before I could respond, Natasha returned, tucking her phone into her purse. She looked between us, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Thomas said shortly. "Mom was just leaving. I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Something about Natasha Reynolds didn't sit right with me, and I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts." The next morning, I did something I'm not particularly proud of. I called my dear friend Catherine, whose son worked in private investigation. Catherine, I need a favor. A discreet favor. Within a week, I had a file that made my blood run cold. Natasha Reynolds existed, but only for the past 4 years. Before that, she'd been Nicole Romano, and before that, Natalie Richardson. Each identity corresponded with a marriage to a wealthy older man. Each marriage had ended in divorce with substantial settlements. And in 2 cases, those ex-husbands had died within a year of the divorce under suspicious circumstances. One fell from his yacht during a solo sailing trip. The other had a fatal heart attack, despite being in excellent health. Neither death had resulted in criminal charges, but both families had raised questions that were never fully answered. I sat in my study, surrounded by documents and photographs, feeling physically ill. My son was engaged to a woman who might be a murderer, and when I tried to tell him, he'd accuse me of meddling again. I needed proof. Something undeniable. That's when Catherine's son, James, mentioned the surveillance footage. Natasha had recently returned from what she'd told Thomas was a business conference in Miami, but the hotel she'd stayed at wasn't hosting any conferences that week. What it did have was security cameras. The footage showed Natasha checking in with a man, not just any man, a married real estate mogul named Richard Caldwell, who was currently in the process of divorcing his wife. They spent 3 days together, barely leaving the suite. On the final night, the camera caught them in the elevator, and the audio was crystal clear. "When are you going to tell him?" Richard asked. Natasha laughed, that tinkling sound I'd heard at dinner. "Tell Thomas? Never, he's too useful. The prenup his mother insisted on is going to be easy to break once I document all his emotional abuse. And once I have access to the Hensley Trust, well, let's just say you and I will be very comfortable." "You're sure about the trust?" "Positive. His mother controls it now, but once we're married and I have power of attorney, which Thomas has already agreed to give me, it's just a matter of time." "The old woman won't know what hit her." I watched that footage 7 times, each viewing making me angrier. This woman wasn't just planning to hurt my son. She was planning to destroy him financially and steal from our family. But I still couldn't show Thomas. Not yet. He was too far gone, too convinced I was the problem. I needed to wait for the right moment, the moment when the truth would be undeniable. The engagement party was at the country club, naturally. Natasha had insisted on it, and Thomas had agreed to everything she wanted. I arrived early, wearing the pearls my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. "Armor for battle. Margaret, how lovely to see you," Natasha cooed when I arrived. She was holding court near the bar, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. Thomas's actual friends seemed notably absent. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you." "Difficult?" "Watching your son move on with his life, building a future that doesn't revolve around you." The barb was delivered with a smile, quiet enough that only I could hear. This was a warning. She was letting me know she'd won. I smiled back. "The thing about futures, dear, is that they're never quite what we expect." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Thomas appeared with champagne. "Mom, a toast," he said, thrusting a glass into my hand. I raised my glass along with everyone else, watching Natasha's triumphant expression as Thomas declared his love for her. She thought she'd already won. She had no idea the game had just begun. That night, I made my move. I called the detective who'd originally investigated one of her ex-husband's deaths, the yachting accident. After some persuasion and the promise of information he didn't have, he agreed to reopen the case. Then I contacted Richard Caldwell's wife, Linda. The conversation was painful but necessary. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have information about your husband's affair, but more importantly, I have information about the woman he's involved with." We met the next day at a small cafe outside the city. I showed her everything. The documents about Natasha's previous identities, the suspicious deaths, the pattern of behavior. Linda's face went from shock to fury to determination. "What do you need from me?" she asked finally. "Your husband is planning to divorce you and marry this woman after she leaves my son. I need you to be patient. Let him think everything is going according to plan. But when the time comes, I'll need you to testify about what you know." Linda smiled grimly. "Oh, I'll do better than that. I'll make sure Richard knows exactly what kind of woman he's involved with. Let them destroy each other. The next 3 months were torture. I had to watch Natasha sink her claws deeper into my son, watch him change his will to make her the primary beneficiary, watch him sign documents giving her power of attorney, in case anything happened to him. I attended wedding planning sessions with a smile plastered on my face, all while gathering more evidence. James had been busy. He'd found bank records showing Natasha had debts, significant debts, that she'd been hiding. He'd tracked down relatives of her previous husbands who were willing to speak about her behavior. He'd even found a former friend who'd cut ties with her after witnessing her manipulative tactics. The file grew thicker, the evidence more damning, but I still waited. The rehearsal dinner was when everything came to a head. Natasha had insisted on a small, intimate gathering at an exclusive restaurant. Just immediate family and the wedding party. Thomas's father had passed away 10 years ago, so it was just me from his side. Natasha's side had no one. Her parents were estranged, she claimed. I arrived with a gift, a family heirloom that tradition dictated should go to Thomas's bride. A diamond bracelet that had been in the Hensley family for 4 generations. How thoughtful, Natasha said, examining it with calculating eyes. I could practically see her mentally adding up its value. The dinner started pleasantly enough. But as wine flowed and Natasha's guard dropped, she became bolder. She started making little comments about how Thomas needed to establish boundaries with me, how he was too attached to his mother, how it wasn't healthy for a grown man to be so dependent on maternal approval. Thomas, to my horror, nodded along. "Natasha's right, Mom," he said, his words slightly slurred. "I've let you control too much of my life. That's going to change after we're married." "Control?" I kept my voice level. "How have I controlled your life, Thomas?" "The trust fund, the properties. You're always involved in my financial decisions." "That's because your father left me in charge of the family assets until you turned 45. That was his decision, not mine. And you're 41. "Exactly," Natasha interjected smoothly. "Thomas is more than capable of managing his own affairs. It's time you stepped back and let him be independent." I looked at my son, really looked at him. This woman had already convinced him that his own mother was the enemy, that the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died, who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through law school, who'd been his biggest cheerleader through every success and failure. I was the problem. "Thomas," I said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." "No." His voice was flat. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. I'm tired of your manipulations." So I did something I'd hoped to avoid. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "Then I think everyone should see this." I played the elevator footage. The audio was damning. Natasha's laugh, her casual cruelty, her plans to destroy my son financially and emotionally. The table went silent. Thomas's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally devastating recognition. Natasha recovered quickly. "That video is fake, obviously edited. Margaret probably paid someone to create it because she can't stand to see Thomas happy." "The hotel can verify the timestamp," I said calmly. "And the man in the video is Richard Caldwell. Perhaps you'd like to explain why you spent 3 days with him while you were supposedly at a business conference." "This is insane," Natasha said, standing up. Her face was flushed, her composure cracking. "Thomas, you're not going to believe this nonsense, are you? Your mother has been trying to sabotage us from the beginning." Thomas hadn't said a word. He was staring at the phone like it might explode. "There's more," I continued. "Nicole Romano, Natalie Richardson. Should I go on? Or would you like to explain to Thomas about your previous marriages? About the men who died shortly after divorcing you?" Now there was real fear in her eyes. "You're not welcome here," Thomas said suddenly, but he was looking at Natasha, not me. "Leave now before you ruin everything." Natasha's mouth opened and closed. "Thomas, please, let me explain." "Get out!" She grabbed her purse and fled, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The wedding party sat in stunned silence. Thomas finally looked at me. His eyes were red, filled with tears he was too proud to shed in public. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me?" He had no answer for that. The aftermath was brutal. Thomas canceled the wedding, a humiliating process that involved notifying 200 guests and losing significant deposits. Natasha tried to sue for breach of contract, but her lawyer withdrew the case once we threatened to present evidence of her fraudulent identity. The detective I'd contacted reopened the investigation into her ex-husband's death. Richard Caldwell's wife filed for divorce, naming Natasha as the other woman. The house of cards Natasha had built came crashing down spectacularly. But the cost was my relationship with Thomas. He moved out of the city, took a position at a firm in Portland, and stopped returning my calls. When I did hear from him, his messages were brief and cold. He'd thank me for saving him from Natasha, then remind me that I'd still betrayed his trust by investigating her without his knowledge. I spent 6 months in a grief deeper than when my husband died. At least then I'd had Thomas. Now I was truly alone. It was Catherine who finally talked sense into me. "You're being ridiculous," she said over tea one afternoon. "You saved your son from a woman who might have killed him. Yes, you went behind his back. Yes, you violated his trust. But you did it because you love him. Any good mother would do the same. Any good mother wouldn't have lost her son in the process. You haven't lost him. He's hurt and embarrassed and processing trauma. Give him time." Time. It felt like all I had was time. Then, 8 months after the canceled wedding, Thomas called. "Mom, I'm in town. Can we meet for coffee?" We met at the same cafe where I'd first shared my concerns about Natasha. Thomas looked older, tired. He'd lost weight. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said without preamble, "working through everything that happened, and she helped me understand something." I waited, afraid to hope. "You were right. About Natasha, about me not listening, about everything. And I was so wrapped up in being in love, or what I thought was love, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." He paused, staring into his coffee cup. "The therapist asked me why I got engaged so quickly after my divorce. Why I was so desperate to prove I could make a relationship work. And what did you say? That I was trying to prove I wasn't like Dad. That I could balance work and marriage. That I could be the man he never was." Thomas looked up, his eyes wet. "But the truth is, I was trying to prove something to you. That I didn't need you. That I was independent. And Natasha saw that vulnerability and exploited it." "Thomas, and let me finish. You did what you had to do to protect me. Yes, it hurt. Yes, I felt betrayed. But you were the only person who saw through her. And you risked our relationship to save me. That takes a kind of courage I'm not sure I have." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything I said, for pushing you away, for not trusting you when I should have." I was crying now, unable to stop the tears. "I'm sorry too. For going behind your back, for not finding a better way. There was no better way. I wouldn't have listened. We both know that." We sat there for a long time, holding hands across the table, rebuilding what had been broken. That was 2 years ago. Thomas eventually met someone new, a fellow lawyer named Rebecca, who was smart, kind, and had no interest in his money because she came from wealth herself. When he brought her to meet me, I did a background check anyway. I couldn't help myself, but Rebecca checked out. More than that, she was wonderful. At their wedding last summer, I sat in the front row and cried happy tears as my son married a woman who truly loved him. During his speech at the reception, Thomas looked directly at me. "My mother once told me that the people who love us most sometimes have to make impossible choices to keep us safe. I didn't understand that then, but I do now. Mom, thank you for having the courage to do what was right, even when it cost you everything. I love you. I'm 74 years old now. My son and Rebecca are expecting their first child in 3 months. They've asked me to move closer to them in Portland, and I'm considering it. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Natasha. The last I heard, she'd moved to Europe and was working under yet another name. I hope she's changed. I hope she's found something real, something that doesn't involve destroying people's lives for profit. But mostly, I think about the lessons I learned through this ordeal. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes love means doing the hard thing, the unpopular thing, the thing that might cost you everything. Sometimes protecting the people you care about requires you to become someone you never thought you'd be. Ruthless, calculating, willing to cross lines you swore you'd never cross. I'm not the same woman I was before Natasha entered our lives. I'm harder now, more cautious, quicker to question people's motives. Some might say I lost something in becoming this way. but I saved my son. And I'd do it all again without hesitation. To any mother reading this, facing a similar situation, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let anyone, not even your own child, convince you to ignore that voice in your head warning you of danger. Because there is nothing, absolutely nothing, more fierce than a mother's love. Thank you for staying with me through this long story. If it resonated with you, please share it. And remember, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your stories, your experiences, they matter. We're all in this together, protecting the people we love. Until next time, this is Margaret Hensley, reminding you that the most powerful weapon in the world is a mother who refuses to give up. Stay vigilant. Stay strong, and never underestimate what love can make you capable of.